is Kaylee Gonzalez. It's actually been a little while since I presented at the SWUG meeting, but it's nice to be back. And I saw some familiar names online and saw some familiar faces here as well. My topic for about the next 25 to 30 minutes is going to be about manufacturing communication, utilizing SOLIDWORKS MBD and inspection. That's kind of a cool topic. It's something I've been wanting to actually put together for a while, is kind of how these two products work together. And they've really kind of gotten to the point that it's pretty seamless here. So I'm going to just go over a couple of things regarding MBD and inspection before we go into SOLIDWORKS, just in case no one has heard of some of these additional SOLIDWORKS products. So SOLIDWORKS MBD, that stands for model-based definition. It is considered an integrated drawing list documentation solution. So we're going to be organizing and creating 3D PMI directly inside of the model. We're going to be able to organize that information into 3D views and then export that into a variety of different formats. We're going to take a look at the eDrawings support for MBD, 3D PDFs, and then we'll take a closer look at the STEP 242 files, which will hold MBD data. There's a couple industry standards that this does comply to. It's something just to be aware of if you are in a position that you are running into needing to comply to some of those specific MIL stats or ASME standard. MBD does run inside of SOLIDWORKS CAD. It's completely integrated into CAD itself, and it's going to leverage something called DIM Expert. And I always thought this was really fascinating. DIM Expert is essentially the engine that drives MBD. Now, DIM Expert has actually been in SOLIDWORKS for probably 15 or 20 years, and it's actually in every single seat of SOLIDWORKS. So DIM Expert is the engine, but it's really the MBD license that will allow the additional organization, the 3D views, and then the ability to export in those formats. But what that means is if you have SOLIDWORKS, you can actually take a look at DIM Expert really at any time because it's already there. We're also going to see a brief example of SOLIDWORKS inspection. Now, the original intent of SOLIDWORKS inspection was to balloon drawings for first article inspection, but it has really been expanded the last couple of years to include the support of 3D PMI, both in the add-in of SOLIDWORKS and in the standalone product. So we will actually see an example of both of those. And then the standalone software, just as a reference, also supports CATIA files, native CATIA files, and then also starting in 2022, the MBD data can be brought into the standalone software in a native SOLIDWORKS file type. I was actually excited about that, but my excitement is not what other people's excitement typically is. So what we're going to be covering, we're going to be starting with the top portion here, which is defining the 3D PMI. We're going to take a look at how we would actually go about that process. That's going to actually take kind of the bulk of the time. Once we have that established, though, then we're going to take that single source of information and use it in a variety of ways. We'll see how we can set this for 3D manufacturing output, first article inspection, and then I'll even show you how MBD can also help with those 2D drawings if we're not quite ready to go into this drawing list environment or mentality. So we're going to start with defining 3D PMI. We're going to be taking a look at SOLIDWORKS model-based definition. So what we have here, this is actually our 3D views. We have a couple that have already been created inside of this assembly. What we can actually see is there's these gears that the placement has to be pretty precise in order for those gears to not lock up. What that really means is that that blue gear plate is what we're going to be taking a look at and defining using model-based definition. As I open this, I see my 3D views tab along the bottom, and there's a couple views that have already been set up. One of the first things I'm going to do is just drag in a note. We can actually create intelligent notes directly inside of this 3D environment, much the same way that we can inside of a drawing. We can make it associative to custom properties, adding material, and that way if material changes, we can actually make it so these notes update as well. Now, when we start thinking about organizing this data, we can actually choose annotation views that they are going to reside in. So that's actually what I just did, is place this into a specific notes annotation view. That way it's going to be present whenever we want to reference it. And I'm just going to recapture the view. It's going to save that additional information in it. Next thing I'm going to do is let's start with our dimensioning scheme. I'm going to choose a linear and geometric scheme and then start establishing my primary, secondary, and that tertiary datum. Now, there is enough intelligence that the system knows this is a pattern, but we can also modify that just to be a simple whole. I can also set my scope, which is, let's start with just a couple specific features to grab this dimension scheme on. And then from here, we'll actually see some of our values appear. We see these values in teal. These were all generated by DimExpert. We also see some green highlighting on the model. That's just an indication that those specific faces are defined from our scheme. Now I'm going to change my tree display to an annotation-based tree. It makes it a little bit easier to work with, and I can see all of my annotation views, which is how SOLIDWORKS actually manages and organizes dimensions in the background. If I want to start creating additional annotations, it can be something as simple as creating basic dimensions. Now, if I go off of my top view, we can see that some basic dimensions may have been created in a different orientation, but I can flip them to the top view really at any time. This is going to give me the opportunity to go through and reorganize these specific annotations. And then when I go to actually save my 3D view, I can choose which annotation views I want to reference and configurations and display states. So I can be very specific about the type of information I'm saving. If I go into my front view, we have some dimensions that have already been created. What I'm doing now is just flipping some of the arrowheads so that it's a little bit more intuitive to look at. I'm going to capture my 3D view now. I can always update it as I add additional information. Again, I'm going to add a couple more basic dimensions and then reorganize to make sure nothing is going to be overlapping. And we'll recapture that just to make sure that basic dimension will be there. Now I have this bolt circle also along the front view. I'm actually going to create a second scheme simply to grab some specific dimensions on that bolt circle. The system's going to recognize that that's a pattern, and I'm actually going to be able to orient this to the front view and see the additional parameters that I just created. Now I'm going to create my own annotation view. We can certainly do this in SOLIDWORKS. What I'm doing now is choosing the specific dimensions that are going to be inside of that new view. I'm setting myself up so when I create this 3D view, I only want the new annotation view that I've created. I can rename this to be flanged holes so that I know during any output that I can snap to this and see only dimensions relative to those holes really at any time. Again, we'll recapture that anytime we make a change just to make sure it's going to stay updated. We have a couple more views we're going to create. I'm going to go into the right view and I'm going to go into my location dimension. Now I'm going to actually utilize DimExpert to treat this whole side as a completed plane. From here, the actual location dimension has a very similar feel to using Smart Dimension that we use in sketches. We can start creating additional tolerancing and additional dimensions simply by choosing faces. I actually really like utilizing some of these MBD functions because I can choose faces instead of being super picky about choosing edges, which is something we sometimes run into in SOLIDWORKS. So as I finished up creating these dimensions, the next thing that we're going to see is if we have something that is potentially at an angle, perhaps we want a dimension going to an intersection of angled sides. Well, we can actually set that up in MBD. So that's actually what I'm doing now. And as an end result, the dimension that actually produces is going to be from those intersection lines. I can go ahead and make further modifications in Y, Z, normal to, or even a user-defined direction in order to change and specify that specific dimension. I'm going to choose a size dimension. Size dimensions are ideal when we need to have sizes for single items such as maybe a chamfer face or a fillet face. We can see what our end result is starting to look like. Again, I'll set my zoom, which is also captured in that 3D view. And we're ready to go on to our left view. We have a couple of things that we're going to take a look at here. One of the first things we're going to do is I'm actually going to show some unassigned items and my feature dimensions. So these are items that have been created through features and through sketches. So what I can actually do is I can grab these specific sketch dimensions that are in black, put them into my annotation view, and then I can actually use those items and capture them directly inside of my annotation views. I can still change the orientation, I can clean it up, I can make it look professional until I'm ready to actually capture the view. So we're not limited to dim expert annotations. We can utilize sketch and feature dimensions as well. Now I'm going to do one more annotation view on the left-hand side. And this is because we're going to have that panel in the back with those specific holes. That's why I'm going to call this the inner holes. And what we're going to do is turn off some of these feature dimensions because we're working with a separate 3D view. And we can even start utilizing things such as section views. That's going to make sure that that front flange isn't going to be available. I can choose to add another size dimension and then even go in and start adding some of my GD&T directly into my model. So I'm going to add a datum reference frame that's going to be at position, at maximum material condition, and then I'll make sure that this is going to be relative to all three of my primary datums, my A, B, and C datums. So we can easily add that information in and even customize it. And we'll finish this up by adding some more basic dimensions to give us a general idea of the location of some of these holes. I'm going to make sure that my section view is still active before I go ahead and grab this view. And once we're completed, I'm just going to update that inner holes capture. So we have quite a few views that we've already created. If I go back to my all dimensions, we can see that it's actually populated. We can see that MBD provides us with this dynamic annotation view. So as items become normal to my screen, they're going to automatically appear. It's just kind of a nice, convenient way to view some of those items. What we're going to do next is I'm going to do one additional view, this time referencing a different configuration of the part. And I'm just going to simply copy the original scheme. What this is going to allow me to do is reuse a lot of the work that I just finished. So from here, I can get rid of any dangling items that maybe are no longer applicable, and I can save this information, reference the new configuration, and I can still save all of these different views inside of the same file. So what we took a look at was kind of the bulk of the work that we're going to actually take a look at, which is defining all the 3D PMI. Once we have this established, there's quite a few things we can actually do with it. The first thing we're going to take a look at is some of this 3D output. One of the first things we're going to take a look at is publishing to eDrawings. With eDrawings, we can choose to output a variety of configurations. Plus, we can package STEP 242 files directly inside of the eDrawings file itself. We can easily access the options, which will enable the end user to potentially measure the eDrawings file. And we can even add a password if there's something we're concerned about with proprietary information. Once I click OK, MBD and SOLIDWORKS are going to go ahead and export this directly into eDrawings with all of our different views. So those 3D views that we spent so much time creating, we have access to all that information inside of eDrawings. We can snap to those locations whenever we want to those specific views. What's really nice about this is inside of eDrawings, we will actually get some dynamic highlighting. So as I click on specific dimensions, their associated items are going to highlight green as well. So the idea here is to try to eliminate any type of ambiguity that could be caused on what these items are referencing by highlighting their faces. We can just see a couple examples there. Under my attachments, this is where that step 242 file is actually located, and I can view it or I can extract it. For now, I'm going to go ahead and just view it, and we'll get an idea of what this is actually going to look like. We can see that all the information we added, including the notes, is already present in the step 242 file. This at this point is graphical data regarding the actual MBD items and the 3D PMI, but it will be there for any type of downstream operations that we may have. So eDrawings is one method of outputting to 3D content. The other is directly to a 3D PDF. MBD allows you to set up very specific types of templates, and we can even go so far as to be specific about what thumbnails or 3D views we want to include, and we can also include a series of custom properties. So if we have specific custom properties that we need to be included, went to all that trouble to put them into our parts and drawings, we want to make sure they're going to get output and exported correctly as well. Once I have all of my specific custom properties completed, again, I can create a step 242 file, and it'll be automatically attached to my 3D PDF when I export this. SOLIDWORKS will go through each view to export this out, and this is an example of what the 3D PDF looks like. Up at the top, we have all of our custom properties that we exported. One thing to also note here is that this is the free Adobe Reader. There's nothing fancy about Adobe. I don't have Adobe Professional. This is just the free reader, and all of the export is really being handled by SOLIDWORKS and MBD. Again, all of the 3D views are going to be available for quick reference. We can snap to them really at any time. This does also provide an actual 3D environment. We can still pan, zoom, and rotate. We do have some highlighting, although it's not quite as robust as what we see in eDrawings. It is still there, and that is still available. All of our views are going to be intact, including those feature dimensions. So again, not just MBD, and different configurations as well. Now, the 3D view area also provides us with some additional functions, such as being able to show cross sections, changing lighting, and even changing some general appearances. We can access a tree over in the left-hand side to see more of our attachments and different configurations. Again, we can open or save and extract that step 242 file directly from within our PDF. Now, these templates can be set up with multiple pages, depending on how complex of a project we're working on. The second view, or the second page, actually has a separate view where we can actually see the model in a little bit larger view screen. We can create independent views, add different types of notes. Again, all of that is really customizable based on what our project is going to include. So we took a look at some of the 3D output, including 3D PDFs, eDrawings, step 242 files. The next thing we're going to do is use that exact same part file, and we're going to create a couple of first article inspection reports. So going back into SOLIDWORKS, I'm going to start with the inspection add-in. Once the add-in has been active, we can go ahead and actually create a new inspection project. I'm going to choose my template, and from here, like any other inspection project, I'm going to start referencing all of those custom properties. Again, the idea here is to reduce typing items in manually and reduce a lot of rework. I can manually update items as needed. One item I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a manual extraction method. The reason why I'm going to use a manual extraction method in this is because I do not want the system to grab every single feature dimension, every single sketch dimension. I want a little bit more control over the specific dimensions I'm including and only the ones that I have specifically added into the model. So I'm doing just a generic box select on my all dimensions view. And what SOLIDWORKS is doing now is it's going through and calculating and populating my characteristic tree with all of those items. I don't see any balloons yet because I haven't actually added them, but the characteristic tree is indeed actually filled in with everything from the MBD data. If I wanted to go ahead and add the notes as well, again, I'm still in this manual add characteristic mode, so I can continue to add anything additional until I have all of my items ready and I can add the actual balloons in. Because everything has been added to the inspection project, SOLIDWORKS is going to take a couple of moments to just go through. It's going to automatically balloon all of those different characteristics that we saw. It's a little bit jumpy, so hopefully it's not too bad looking on the big screen. But it's going to give us a set of all of these balloons. Again, we can click on them. It helps us navigate through all the different views. All the different balloons are going to be here and included as well. All of the different parameters are also going to be available as we're used to inside of any other type of drawing environment. What I'm doing next is I'm going to explode this note in a very specific way. Because we're working with a single annotation having been completed in SOLIDWORKS, from a quality perspective, we may want to break this out in a very specific way so that the balloons and the specific line items are going to make sense from a quality perspective. This also gives me the ability to filter out possibly unnecessary data that maybe a quality department wouldn't necessarily need. Perhaps there's specific manufacturing information, which gives us a little bit of flexibility in customizing that type of content. And we can see the different line items for the notes that were created. Now, they're currently all listed under a single balloon item, balloon number 30. I can actually ungroup those items so that they all have their own balloon number. You can leave it as it is, or you could go ahead and give it its own line item. What that means is when I go to export this into Excel, we will actually see all of those separate annotations with their own balloons as well. We'll actually see it here in just a moment as this goes through and generates this inspection report. This gives you an idea of one possible scenario. These templates are customizable. I actually really cleaned up and customized this one for the upper and lower tolerances, limits. What we're going to do next is we're going to jump into inspection standalone. Same exact file, same idea. This time, though, we're not inside of SOLIDWORKS. We still have access to things like custom properties. We can still grab information directly from the model itself. If I want to actually see this, all of my MBD views are actually available inside of the inspection standalone product. That's what we're actually viewing in that upper right-hand corner. I can still snap to each view really at any point in time. What's also really nice about this is I can right-click and say extract annotations, and it really only takes a couple of seconds to really start populating our entire first article inspection sheet. Now, we may want to do some adjustments to make sure that the data is going to be just right for how we want to export some of this out. We may have also grabbed information, maybe like datum A or B, that we didn't necessarily need. So we can use the characteristic tree to really clean up the data, get it to be exactly the way that we want. But the bulk of the work, the actual ballooning, has already been completed. So here we can delete rows, we can readjust rows, and we could also re-explode the same type of annotation. Again, we're doing kind of the same project in a different software. Instead of in the add-in, we're doing this in the standalone, but we can still get very comparable results. As I view some of my different captures here, what we can actually do when we go to export this is not only can we export the specific first article inspection report, we can grab screen captures. These are actually going to allow me to choose specific captures from those 3D views that we created, and the system's just going to generate a screenshot for me. Now, screenshots are not difficult to take, but why do it manually when the system will just do it for you? We'll actually see what this is going to look like. We see an example of our first article inspection report. And what we're also going to notice along the very bottom is that there are some additional tabs. When I take a look at some of these additional tabs, we have screenshots. These are not 3D. We can't pan, zoom, or rotate. It is just Excel, but it did actually capture those and put them in its own specific tab so that they are available and ready to go inside of our output file. The screenshots are optional. We don't have to include them, but that can be kind of an efficient way to grab some of that information and data. So we took a look at a couple ways we can grab first article inspection reports, again, directly from 3D models. You're not even doing anything with drawings at this point, but that's what this last section is. So even though we did MBD, even though we have all this information in the 3D model, we can still leverage it to make a 2D drawing. So again, back to the original model, I'm going to create a drawing same way I would any other drawing and choose my template. And I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my view palette. What's nice about the view palette is all of those 3D views are already there. They just automatically populate and I can start using them. Just for this first page, I'm just going to bring in a generic isometric view, change the scale similar to like a cover sheet. Going forward, I'm going to make sure that I choose my dim expert annotation in the view palette, which is going to make this drag and drop procedure pretty inclusive. All of those 3D views that we put together, we organized, we developed, that's all being brought in just using auto start projected view and our dim expert annotations. Right now, I'm going to change the visualization so it's not shaded with edges. What's nice about working in drawings when we do run into this situation is even though we are working with this MBD data, we still have all of our traditional drawing functions available to us. So for example, we can actually do a crop view, which would make sense in this environment. And we can then continue to change and specify and reorganize these annotations. They're definitely not locked into place. I could also do a specific section view. And I'm actually going to flip this onto a third sheet. The reason why I'm doing a section view is because remember for those inner holes, we actually did a section view with MBD. So all of those values are going to be very nicely organized in that section. And here we see an example of those feature and sketch dimensions that we utilized. And of course, even the other configuration is already there. We can go ahead and start bringing that last piece of information into our drawing. So we're able to create kind of the very beginning structure of our drawing very quickly, simply by utilizing a lot of the MBD work that we had already created. So the integration of the 3D views into the view palette is one area that really makes that possible. So we just saw how we can utilize dim expert and model-based definition even in the creation of 2D drawings. So we took a look at quite a few pieces of information. I know there's a lot of content here, but we first of all defined the 3D PMI. That's going to be the basis for everything else that we did. And from there, that one single part file, we were able to generate 3D manufacturing output in a variety of ways. We can utilize it several ways using first article inspection reports and even utilizing it to create 2D drawings.